In this book, there's a comment about Emma Jung that she was doing something at the psychology club, and at one point she was the president, and somebody commented, she was the most individuated person in the room. And, um, I think I understand how Carl and Emma held it together for 53 years that they were married before she died. And it had to do with understanding the individuation process and accepting one another. And in marriage, in a marriage ceremony, we say, in sickness and health, for better or for worse, right? But when we're 22 and we get married, we don't really understand what that means, right? And we surely don't understand what one another is going to go through in their own development and their own midlife crisis and that sort of thing. And I think a lot of the stuff that we have been talking about in this group is about the midlife crisis and about how do you make the most of the next phase of your life? How do you make it meaningful to you? Okay, that's the important issue, is how is your life meaningful to you? I think there are a few people in the senior generation that were never called in that way, but I think that gradually we're evolving to the point where we are being called, and the world is changing so fast. I mean, we have no sense of it here in the US because we have all these wonderful things at our disposal, distractions. We can videotape conversations like this, but so are kids in Zimbabwe having this now, and the idea that people in India or Zimbabwe who were basically, some of them in India are still living in the 12th century, but they're coming from the 12th century to the 21st century in like 10 years instead of in hundreds of years.
Yeah, I saw that in northern India where people are standing in the rubble of their buildings and their homes, and it is rubble.
It is rubble, sure.
With cell phones.
With cell
Every
phones.
one of them has cell phones.
Right.
Probably an American T-shirt. It's
right, exactly.
Real.
Strange. It's an amazing contrast.
Well, they're jumping into the 21st century very fast, and they're very bright. Okay, they're very bright. Some of the smartest people I've ever met are in India. And I don't know why that is, but it definitely is true. And so the question is, how do you harness up all this brain power? And we see it in Emma's story, right? I mean, Carl had more than one woman in his life, many more. And, very honestly, I've had more than one woman in my life. But, oh, by the way, I was in Japan for 5 years, and I built a company built on women's work, on women executives working in my company who made a successful company. I could never have done it with Japanese men. No chance. Okay. Here, when I did sea-based systems, it was almost all women. It was 90% women. And the leaders of my company were women. The people that built the company with me were women. And so, yes, I have a coterie of women around me in one way or another, or have always had. And that's because I respect their work, and I respect their commitment to make things work in a certain way. Women are much more respectful of culture and organization than men are, right? Men, if allowed to run amok, will become Donald Trump.
Too individualistic.
Yeah. I mean,
not cooperative.
Not cooperative and more combative, right? But women have always been holding the culture together. So,
It's interesting. So,
huh?
just from a woman's perspective and having female managers, I prefer a male because of there's things that females
That's
deal
because
with
they're in a
from women,
hierarchy position.
Right.
and there's a certain type who tends to maybe has the time or the ability to get.
I've
to a
heard
certain,
that over and over and over.
and it's interesting because you think rah rah rah, but when you're in the position, it's like my God, it's not the level of fairness isn't always there. So it's interesting.
Did you find that in your business where you had hierarchies of women?
You might not see it because who would you tell?
Yeah. Well, Skip would have seen it though. You're very intuitive. Right?
He would have.
Well, yeah, but
Did you have to step in and resolve conflicts between women like that?
no, I mean, basically, the way I run a company is as a shrink. Okay.
Lucky you.
And lucky. Okay. And so basically,
That seems pretty smart.
what I spent, very honestly, what I
Exhausting.
spent most of my time doing was interacting with people. And I just pick people out of the company and say, come on, let's go talk for a while. And we talk for a half hour or an hour. And we talk about what the problems they saw in the company. And once a week we would have a company meeting with certain level of managers, and I'd say, you know, what are the problems? I don't want to hear about what's good. I want to hear about what you're worried about. And if you're not worried about something, you're not working hard enough. You know, if you haven't made a mistake this week, you better start working harder, right? Because I expect people to make mistakes. And that's very contrary to the way a lot of people work. But, you know, every so often, I mean, like the guy I had lunch with today, he's 10 years my senior. I have huge respect for him, okay? And back when we were struggling through financial problems in the early going of a company, and this actually happened like 3 times with him in the same process. So we started up 3 different times. He would always keep the creditors off my back, and he just. The funny thing was, he spent 30 years selling bonds to municipal bonds to big ticket investors. So we would sell like a $10 million worth of bonds in a phone call. And when the savings and loan thing collapsed, he was hired by Resolution Trust to come in and sell off their portfolio. And so he spent 30 years selling bonds, right? And so he has such a perfected telephone presence, right? He can convince any creditor to give you another 2 weeks or whatever it is you need to get by. And he always has had that skill, and he went to the University of Virginia, so he has a southern accent, and he's very laid back. He says, no, don't worry, everything will be fine.
Picturing House of Cards.
Right, exactly, yeah. But so he kept the creditors off my back for many years, and ultimately it paid off because we got this company public, right?
Oh, wow.
Okay, and so, but that's the way I operate. Everybody understands what the hierarchy is, but I'd rather them not see it on a day-to-day basis. But, you know, I lived in a hole in the ground with rats and a sergeant in the Marine Corps, and I was a first lieutenant. And I lived in that hole in the ground for 4 months with him. And we played bridge together. We called each other Skip and Jerry, and there was never any animosity between us. But there was also no question about who was the officer and who was the sergeant, right? And I believe that's the way to run an organization. It's not, I'm the boss and you do it my way all the time, because it's very often that the sergeants know better than you do what to do.
That's a discernment issue. Yeah.
Pardon?
That's a discernment issue.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a rare skill, and that's a whole subject in and of itself.
Surely it is.
Yeah.
Right. So, going back, some people are constellated by different things. You look at the things I've done, the things that some of our famous people in the U.S. have done. Very honestly, when George Bush was president of the United States, he went on a tour of the Middle East, and he went to Cairo, Riyadh, and Tel Aviv. And on the same trip, I went from Tel Aviv to Cairo, or to Riyadh to Cairo. And I literally passed his motorcade in Riyadh on the road. I saw him go by. And he and I were doing the same tour in reverse. I was sort of
what
like...
What did you read into that?
Well,
there's something there.
I mean, the thing is, maybe you're better off as a businessman than you are as president of the United States.
Yeah, I'd say who wants that job?
Yeah, who wants that job? Because he was, he's basically a prisoner and always having to watch his back, and I was running around. One time I got off an elevator in the International Hotel in Riyadh, and right in front of me, here's a young, like 30-year-old in his thobe, and he's got a sidearm, and I go, whoa, what did I just walk into? And it turned out that, I was sort of, because I was staying at this high-class hotel, I was having breakfast with these. I wasn't actually having breakfast with them, but the breakfast room was the same room the princes were having their breakfast in, right?
They got bodyguards all over.
And they had bodyguards, and they were back in serious heat, and it wasn't concealed weapons, it was weapons right out there ready to go, And I said, well, okay.
Wow.
And I say, okay, well, I think I'll just cool it here. There have been a few incidents like that.
So it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, but my impression is that as you go back 2 or 3 generations, people had no real clue about individuation per se. It wasn't really prominent. It was just like you do what your dad did. If you're a farmer, you're a farmer. If you're a mechanic, you're a mechanic, whatever. Sure. And
when I went in the military, I went in the family business.
So things you believe are opening up.
Definitely.
In that regard.
Hugely.
And
I mean, what I think we're here about, John, what I think we're here about is, what are the two of you going to make as the meaning of your life going forward? Okay, you have another at least 20 years, let's say, and you have another 30 or 40.
100. I'm going to be a bionic something.
Right. Okay, so
you have replacement parts by then, right?
Brain, everything.
And so the question is, what is the meaning of your life? Okay, and the reason I'm doing this and why I'm encouraging you to continue to do it is because Dr. Jung has always been my therapist, very honestly, and I've gotten into all sorts of shit in my life, no question about it. But whenever I do, I've gone back to read something of his, and it calms me, it soothes me. And I'm hoping through these videos to have an influence on others to study this work, because it's really about how we need to be living moving forward. And he knew that. Okay, he knew that in his lifetime, but he said in his lifetime, I know I'm going to be posthumous. Okay.
That's what John was just saying before you arrived about how the Cultural Revolution of the 60s, I mean, he basically set the stage for everything with his ideas.
That's right.
Basically invented it.
He invented it, and you know the Aquarius, everything that was in hair came out of his work. It did.
And I had no idea about any of that.
Right. And of course nobody knew about it really then, but his work is still incredibly influential in Hollywood. I mean, the Star Wars, all the Star Wars movies, but
I saw that
there's
video you told us about George Lucas's interview.
right. That's phenomenal, isn't it? And then there's a new television series which Debbie and I just discovered, which is called Falling Water. And have you seen it?
I saw the first episode. I have to catch up. But the dreams or something, they're connected.
Right. The three of them are connected through the collective unconscious, and they literally mention Carl Jung's collective unconscious in the first episode. Right? They mention it, and so Hollywood is trying to get this out one way or another, and they have been for 40 years. I mean, Lucas.
If it wasn't for all these distractions we've got,
Well,
we
and
might
that-
get a lot further with these types of ideas, and
Right.
people might be happier instead of constantly seeking in all the wrong directions.
Right. Well,
Well, I wonder how much of it requires sheer intellectual power to absorb it, though. I mean, it does take a lot of work.
Opportunity, and then even where society is. I'm just
Right.
when
And
you
being
were
able
just
to
talking,
understand it.
but
right?
I can
You
read
have
it to people
sit-
and they say, what the hell are you talking about?
Well, everyone
Right.
thinks in Twitter bites now. So to actually sit,
Exactly.
it is hard
Attention
to
span.
sit and focus on
Right.
reading.
are you on Twitter?
I'm on there, but I don't go on there because I know
Okay.
you can get easily.
Well,
It's addictive. Why are you on there?
I have
Different stuff?
nearly 32,000 followers on
Oh,
Twitter.
wow.
And I believe it because I believe that Twitter is basically the collective unconscious of humanity.
It is, and it's
Right.
scary. It's just thinking of the bites going through the universe.
Right, but that's what's happening, and so that's why I'm doing these videos, right? Is mainly because if this can be seen in Azerbaijan by the end of this week, then people can start thinking, well, you know, maybe I better look at this guy's work and see what it could do for me.
I mean, do you feel that's in the, like, there's a movement going on? I mean, don't
Oh,
you
there's
feel
definitely-
things are definitely shifting and,
Feels like it.
you know, there's
Yeah.
change, but
Right, there's
we're in it,
change.
so we don't know.
Yeah, it's hard while
I
we're
always
in it.
pick up these things. This is proof, okay?
Right. Well, let me
Otherwise, 10
let me
years
give you an
ago,
example on
it was
Facebook.
mainstream, but then it comes along.
Right. Are you on Facebook?
Mhm.
Okay. Are you on Facebook?
Yes.
You can always friend me on Facebook.
Okay, you under Skip?
Well, Donald L. Conover, Donald L. Skip Conover, Donald
Okay.
Conover. You'll
We'll
find
find
me. No problem. But what was I going to say?
Out there in the atmosphere, the change.
The progression.
Well, right. I mean, I never would have imagined in 2005, let's say. I mean, I was seeing things about what was wrong with the Middle East, and you can read my book from 2007, which basically was predicting ISIS. I could predict it,
Oh.
right? I predicted ISIS in my 2007
Wow.
book.
Prescient.
Right. I mean, I'll send you the dust cover for my book. I'm not. Actually, it's on the Dropbox, but I'll send it to you in an email.